In the news this week, we'll be talking about RGB hardware and the curious case of bleaching the back of video cards with the light. Additionally, Intel is investigating 13th and 14th gen stability issues in some games. Further, we'll be talking about the new Lenovo Legion Go discussion. This is something official, it's not a rumor, but they didn't say much. They basically said, we're working on a Legion Go 2, we'll talk about that. And AMD Ryzen 9000 confirmed as the next mainstream desktop CPU part. But there's some additional 8,000 CPU SKUs that just launched as well. Before that, this video is brought to you by Lee and the O11D Evo RGB case. The O11D Evo RGB is an updated entry to the famed O11 lineup, retaining heavy support for fan mounts, drive mount locations, and flexibility on component mounting, such as two options for the power supply. The O11D Evo RGB's dual chamber approach aims to maximize cable storage on the backside to streamline cable management, coupling this with a unique vertical GPU mount to showcase the most expensive part in most systems. Learn more at the link in the description below. Up first, Intel's Raptor Lake CPUs and the refresh, the 13 and 14 series CPUs, have had some gaming instability complaints since around when the 13 series launched. This was back in 2022. It's continued till now. ZDNet.co.kr says that users have reported issues with games like The Finals, Battlefield 2042, Remnant 2, Lords of the Fallen, Hogwarts Legacy, Horizon, Overwatch 2, and Lies of P. And not long ago, actually, Adam from PC World, shout out to Adam, contacted me because he had questions about this. He thought that maybe they had stumbled into this stability issue with one of their recent builds for the staff. We haven't yet encountered the problem, but that might be because it's a mixture of the game and the CPU itself. So if this is a CPU specific, as in not just the model or the SKU, but literally that CPU plus game combination, that explains why not everyone is seeing it. We don't test any of these games that I just listed in our usual suite. But the instability that broke the camel's back, is that a thing? I don't know if that's really a thing, but we're going to go with it. It seems to be with Tekken 8, with the Korean ZDNet publication reporting that numerous Korean PC Tekken 8 players have been seeing a not enough video memory prompt, which is affecting owners of the 13 and 14 series CPUs. These issues have reportedly prompted over 10 of the CPUs to be returned in Korea every day. Anecdotally, that sounds like a lot for a region, but it's hard to really know. Intel moves massive volume, but definitely was enough to catch Intel's attention, so more than usual. Video memory, in theory, should have little to do with the CPU directly. Ultimately, though, almost everything interacts with the CPU at some level, and crash prompts are rarely precise. It's not clear what's causing these issues at this point, but it has prompted Intel to respond. Intel publicly stated that it's investigating the issue. However, the company hasn't yet given any indication as to if they have a lead for the problem. Now, when I spoke with Adam from PC World previously, this might have been in December, January or something, but we didn't know yet if it was a specific instability issue or if it was something else. So some of the troubleshooting we were trying was, he had been experimenting with CPU power limits. I gave him some guidance on undervolting the CPU for vCore specifically, walking through frequency, either overclocking or downclocking, basically things you would do in a traditional overclocking scenario to achieve stability or undervolting scenario to achieve stability, and see if that helps to fix the problem. And I'm sure they're talking about this over there in probably their Full Nerd podcast if you want to hear more about their experiences. Now, we may look into this if we find the time and if we end up with a chip that has problems. We do have Tekken 8, and can at least run it against the CPUs we have here and see if it's anything super obvious, like immediate crashes. Your input would also help if you happen to have these issues and you're pretty sure it's not just your setup. So if you've overclocked, that it might be your setup. But if you haven't, you're running out of box, it would help to know really just two things. One is the motherboard, the other is the CPU. Actually, three things. The third would be the game or the application that causes the issue. That'll give us a little bit to work with in the comments. So as we do some brief cursory checking, we'll basically just replicate your setups the best we can and see if we can get the failure on one of our CPUs. Otherwise, our schedule is pretty slammed with some other investigative pieces we're working on right now. So stay tuned for those. We'll see if we get to this. It's not looking good just because the schedule's so packed, but we'll do our best. All right, next one is the curious case of RGB hardware. This story is just kind of fun. So it is about RGB hardware, we'll go with reportedly, staining video card backplates, like bleaching them. Most recently, Americans were reminded that staring into a solar eclipse is not good for them, or just really staring at the sun in general. But there's news. The human eye isn't the only thing susceptible to light damage. Reddit user Taichi93 posted an interesting image of a video card that looks like it has burn marks that may have been derived from RGB lighting. The card purportedly belongs to Taichi93's brother and appears to be an MSI RTX 3080 Ti when we zoom in. Looking at the image, it looks like the card's backplate still has a light projection on top of it, but it is outside of the case. The Reddit user claims it's not light reflection from other things in the room either. If it weren't weird enough, 2 days later, Reddit user Defected Cat posted an image of an MSI RTX 3080 bearing remarkably similar markings. You've heard of ray traced graphics cards before, but this is ridiculous. Someone needs to get Jensen on the phone.
No.
Defected Cat posted another image of a different card within the case, a 4080, just showing how the G.Skill RGB RAM lighting has some suspicious lighting marks. It's not clear if the aftermath here is a result of something like maybe UV light burn or just from more simple light bleaching. And we don't study light emission or RGB LED staining of backplates, but when we were working on this story, I was trying to think of other hobbies that might be heavily affected by lighting stains with people who are neurotic about protecting the things that they collect. And the first thing that came to mind, comic books. Also Funko Pop collections. I did some brief looking around, and it actually does appear that lighting stains is a common complaint in these spaces. There were a number of posts I ran across on Reddit and elsewhere, forums, where some of the collectors are talking about how their, I was gonna say devices, their collectibles were not in direct sunlight and yet still got stained by the LED lighting found in their shelving or their display cases, particularly when left on 24/7. Now, this is with paper products in those spaces, or cardboards and plastics rather than metals, but just from looking around, it seems like some of the enthusiasts in those spaces who are really serious about displaying their products either buy special LEDs or put a UV filter over them, similar to what you might do with a camera lens. And I'm sure some of you are in that space. You can comment more below on if you know anything about that. But it does look like it's a thing, I guess is the point. We were curious how prevalent this might be. But putting our detective hats on and trying to illuminate the mystery behind the illumination, the G.Skill RGB RAM might initially seem like the culprit, and it potentially could be in Defected Cat's case, well, not case, but scenario. But this doesn't explain why the light marks also appear in the photo shared by Taichi93, whose brother reportedly used Corsair Vengeance RAM. The common thread between the GPUs is that they're both MSI cards. Maybe it has something to do with the way the backplate is coated or something like that. But the thing we're curious about at this point, well, first of all, neither of the users, the second one didn't see the first one's post, so it was just a coincidence. But what we'd like to see is anything from you all. So if any of you have this, I don't know if it's fair to call it a problem or not, but if you've had this occur, then email tips, T-I-P-S, at gamersnexus.net with a photo of a light-stained device, specifically from RGB lighting in your case. And what we're gonna do is, if we get any, we'll include them in next week's news recap for some fun. And who knows, maybe we get something out of it. But realistically, it just might be kind of interesting, and that's kind of the start and the end of it. Take the device out of your case, or turn the case lights off at least so it's clear that it's not a reflection. Send it over, we'll take a look, and who knows, maybe there's a common theme among them, like the coating quality of the backplate. Moving on, we combined 2 AMD Ryzen stories for this one. They're quick. First, AMD's website now officially mentions the Ryzen 8000F CPUs, which are new additions to its existing lineup of APUs in the 8000 series. The AMD R7-8700F CPU is a worldwide launch. The CPU is an 8-core, 16-thread solution with a base of 4.1 GHz and boost of 5 GHz maximally. The default TDP is 65 watts, PCIe generation is 4.0, not 5.0, and it has 20 total PCIe lanes on the CPU. The architecture is Zen 4, memory is still DDR5, and there's no integrated graphics on these SKUs. AMD also posted its R5-8400F CPU, which is a 6-core, 12-thread variant of the otherwise similar 8700F. Clocks are lower as expected. TDP is still 65 watts default. The other story is the 9000 series. That's a desktop, mainstream desktop solution coming up. should be Zen 5 in theory, and should be after Computex sometime, which means after June or somewhere in there. AMD has had this basically confirmed via a chipset driver update. So the appearance of the Ryzen 9000 naming was in the chipset driver update, was spotted in a tweet, and we've been able to additionally confirm this naming with some board partners of AMD. So it sounds like that's the route they're going, assuming the name sticks. Our understanding from the current rumors and from speaking with partners is that basically this 8000 series is sticking around for things like the 8700F, 8400F, but otherwise the actual next generation properly will be on this 9000 naming. Up next, more Battlemage. Battlemage has been in the rumor mill for a couple weeks now, and normally when there are this many leaks about a product, whether or not they're accurate or true or precise, it does tend to indicate that there is actually something on the way relatively soon. Now, this one is pretty straightforward. So according to German publication computerbase.de, Intel is aiming to release its Battlemage GPUs this fall. The publication notes that industry circles at Embedded World 2024, held in Nuremberg, Germany, have, they say secretly, divulged Intel's plans to release before Black Friday. Now, for our international viewers, Black Friday is a celebrated and highly respected holiday in America. And in fact, it's our most sacred and important holiday. It's the holiday when Americans turn into deal-hungry zombies. They roam the streets looking for deals, smash their way into stores, and you know, it's better to show a clip. We have one from last year.
Where's your Christmas spirit?
Intel's timing it right, though. Intel engineer Tom Peterson had previously stated he was hopeful that Battlemage would be out before CES 2025 in a discussion with PC World. And if this rumor turns out to be true, it would line up with that hope from Intel. Some commentary here. Intel in the past with Arc had this amazing opportunity to strike while NVIDIA and AMD prices were either high or the GPUs were just not that available. And they kind of missed it. They delayed into oblivion and getting Imperial Guard flashbacks.
Stop right there, criminal scum!
They used that time to work on drivers, launched to, it was a bad launch. It was really not good. And they've improved it in the 2 or so years since. Hopefully, for Intel's sake, this isn't too much of a repeat. They will have to contend with the RTX 5000 series, maybe AMD's next lineup, if they ship too late. The closer they ship to those contenders, the more at risk Intel will be of having to fight on value in ways that it might not want to, just because it'll chew into the margin of that division. So we'll see. They do need to ship sooner than later, but they also can't ship something that's buggy and broken. So tough place to be for Intel. They're gonna have to make a decision, and a lot of that's gonna boil down to how much of the Arc Alchemist stuff just directly sockets into Battlemage to where it doesn't have as many driver pains as previously. Next one, it's been only since October that Lenovo launched its Legion Go handheld that we've reviewed more recently than that, and you should check out that review if you haven't already. It's pretty cool, and there's some latency testing in there. But at the company's recent Innovate event, Lenovo talked about plans for a Legion 2. This is now, I think it's the fourth company in the handheld space that's already talking about a next generation. So Steam, when we talked with Valve, they were talking about having considered and thought about starting to work on a Steam Deck 2 back when the OLED was launching, but they were clear that they don't consider the OLED to be a Steam Deck 2. Asus talked about working on an ROG Ally 2 sometime later this year, potentially. And then MSI jumped the gun and was like, you know what? You guys have 2, we're gonna have 4. That's how many claws we're gonna have. That makes us 4 times better than your devices. Everyone's working on follow-ups. In a roundtable discussion captured by Chris Steed, Lenovo stated that the company is still working on making updates to the original release. Now, unrelated to that event, we can definitely confirm that that's true, because when we were looking around on Lenovo's forums to try and figure out some issues we were having with the Legion during the review process, we saw that they appeared to have one primary, maybe firmware developer who also engages with the community and has been enacting a lot of community requests, feature requests, change and bug updates directly, which is actually pretty cool. It seems like the developer or developers may have some level of autonomy away from corporate, and that's awesome to see because that's what they need to hastily update a new device. But anyway, we've been impressed with how frequently they've been taking community requests and implementing them. As for the news, Lenovo's recent statement was this. They said, quote, "We are still spending a lot of resources improving on the current Legion Go over the span of the last 6 months since launch. We have unlocked, from day one until now, a lot more experiences, and there are still engineering efforts to try and bring the next wave of features to the product. It's definitely a category that we do see potential in, and we continue to invest. We're looking towards when the time comes right, of course, having the next generation to provide even more features." Now, one of the marquee design decisions that really separated the Legion Go from its handheld PC counterparts was the separable controllers from its screen, similar to the Nintendo Switch. Details are non-existent on the next-gen version, including an official name, other than they want to make one. Again, you can watch the review for our thoughts overall on the device, key areas we'd like to see some improvement, or maybe just better leveraging some of the technologies they have. Would be working on getting those separable controllers in some way to work more natively as dual controllers, because it's technically possible. You can do it. You could definitely do it with button remapping. It's just kind of a pain. But it seems like, barring some kind of Nintendo intellectual property or something like that, something that Lenovo could work towards, where as long as it's maybe a lower button input game and you don't need a full controller, you could potentially have two people playing on it. Of course, you could also connect an Xbox controller via Bluetooth, and then because they're separable, you don't have the other person blocking the screen by holding the controller. So another area we'd like to see some improvement is just some rigidity and strength in the way the controllers connect to the body. There's a little bit of flex. It doesn't seem to be a structural issue. It just feels a little bit lower quality than perhaps it could be. So that's another thing we'd like to see them work on in Gen 2. All right, up next, the CHIPS Act is in the news again. So the CHIPS and Science Act has now had the U.S. government announcing it's giving away loads of money to Intel and now TSMC for working on fabs in the U.S. And the latest news is TSMC getting $11.6 billion in funding, $5 billion of which comes by the way of loans. They're also distributing this money in the form of incentives like taxes, for example. Now, the backronym CHIPS stands for Creating Helpful Incentives to Produce Semiconductors. Would have loved to be in the room in that acronym creation meeting. Was it like commitment to high-tech integrated production subsidies? No. Catalyzing hardware industrial products and supply? No. Creating helpful incentives to produce semiconductors? That's it! According to Congress.gov, the CHIPS Act was designed to, quote, carry out activities relating to the creation of incentives to produce semiconductors in the United States, end quote. In this case, the funds will be used to construct 3 semiconductor facilities in Arizona. According to Tom's Hardware, quote, TSMC will build the 3rd fab module near its Fab 21 Phase 1, which should start production of chips using 4nm and 5nm class process technologies in the first half of 2025. Tom's added that Fab 21 Phase 2 is scheduled to begin operations in 2028, making chips on 2nm and 3nm process technologies. They said the 3rd plant will likely use an even more advanced fabrication process. Now, the U.S. has previously provided Intel funding via the CHIPS Act as well, with Intel putting its billions of incentives towards facilities also in Arizona, actually pretty close by to TSMC, relatively speaking. And we visited the Intel facilities. We have, as mentioned before, a huge tour video coming up with tons of technical discussion, experts, and including a tour of the construction site that received some of the funding. Intel's new facilities are Fab 52 and Fab 62. Our understanding is that it is also upfitting some of the other fabs around the U.S., including in Ohio. And Tom's reported that TSMC has received more substantial support from the CHIPS Act than Intel thus far. Up next, according to a new report by the New York Times, Google and OpenAI stand accused of using YouTube data and gathering it to train their AI solutions, whether that's LLMs or otherwise. Now, Google owns YouTube. However, the suggestion that was posed here in this article was that improper AI training might overstep creator copyrights, and this would fuel ongoing concerns of just the discussion about AI stealing work of creatives, and not stating an opinion on that from our side for now. In OpenAI's case, the company created speech recognition tool Whisper that is supposed to transcribe audio from YouTube videos to bolster its capabilities. The New York Times wrote, quote, ultimately an OpenAI team transcribed more than 1 million hours of YouTube videos. Meanwhile, we write, why didn't they just use the show transcript button that YouTube already has? Checkmate, OpenAI. You can send me an offer for that idea via email. Maybe this is a thing where they were like, it's one step removed. We're not using YouTube tools. We built our own tools. The New York Times writes this, quote, some Google employees were aware that OpenAI had harvested YouTube videos for data, two people with knowledge of the company said, but they didn't stop OpenAI because Google had also used the transcripts of YouTube videos to train its AI models, as they said. The New York Times suggests that that practice may have violated the copyrights of YouTube creators, so if Google made a fuss about OpenAI, there might have been public outcry against its own methods. Basically like the hall monitor looking the other way when someone's trying to skip class because they're going to try and skip class later. Now, Google did have a response. They basically disputed this in a statement. Google said via the New York Times that its AI models are trained on some YouTube content, which was allowed under agreements with YouTube creators. In a statement to the New York Times, Google also claims that it had no knowledge of OpenAI's practices and prohibited unauthorized scraping or downloading of YouTube content. Ultimately, all the AI companies right now in the space are doing some form of research that is not really fully legally defined yet. A lot of it's operating in these gray areas, and that means there's going to be a lot of dealing with potential repercussions down the road. But as usual, if you're a big enough mega corporation, then the fines will never be greater than what you've profited. So we'll see how this one develops. All right, last one's pretty fun. This is a modder making a wristwatch out of a Raspberry Pi. Actually, super cool project. Love covering these kinds of things as the last story in news, because it highlights creativity and cool ways to use hardware. So here's the story. As a learning project, modder Kim Paulson has constructed a watch out of a Raspberry Pi, replacing the need for an Apple Watch with the Raspberry one. Do you see? According to Paulson, the model in particular is based on the RP2040 chip, using KiCad to design the circular PCB, which measures 28.5 millimeters in diameter. Instead of physical hands to tell the hours, minutes, and seconds, the watch uses RGB LEDs coupled with a battery. I'm looking forward to the RGB LED light bleaching reports from that one. It's like in a few years, is there just this sort of ominous glow on your wrist where the watch was? Probably not, but I really wanted to connect it to the other story. This means that in essence, Paulson has constructed a time machine using a Raspberry Pi. When asked on Reddit about battery life, the modder stated that more work needs to be done on the device and wrote, haven't tested much yet. The LEDs draw a lot even when not lit, so not good, just happy it works. We'll try to fit it within a steel case using the largest battery I can find. And elaborating on upcoming refinements to the watch, the modder added that they're thinking of diffusing the rain a bit with plastic rings or paper because the LEDs are a bit sharp. Super cool project though. Like I said, I love reading about these and covering them. Jimmy has fun finding them when he's writing news. Jeremy when he writes episodes. And it's just kind of, the reason I like it, I think, is because it reminds me of getting into this stuff where I had like those build it at home baby's first electronics kit type things. And that's kind of, Raspberry Pi definitely goes down that same route, just with a lot more options and capabilities. So good work on the watch, fun to cover. We'll look for another one like this next time. And thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersnexus.net to help us out directly, or patreon.com/gamersnexus to throw us a few bucks. We'll see you all next time.